Welcome. Sorry about the slight delay. We wanted to get some video things going. Thrilled to have you here. My name is Peter. I'm the president of Anderson Ranch. Before half of our board chair is here, Rona, our staff, our trustees, our national council who make all the ranch activities possible. Welcome. This is our last formal talk of the summer series lectures, but there is a lot more going on at the ranch. Lectures every Sunday night, every Tuesday night, and really just a fun time to come. So please keep coming. The summer is not over for us. I'll quickly thank the people who make this series possible. Adam and Mel Lewis underwrite the series in honor of Toby. I almost said Toby was underwriting it in honor of Mel and Adam, but that's not the case. You all know Toby and her legacy here in town at the ranch with the Progressive Collection, but really just thrilled to have their names on this series. There is a group of individuals who underwrite this series. I want to recognize them quickly. Sarah Arison and Tom Willem, Jill and Jay Bernstein, Melissa and John Seriel, Rona and Jeff Citron, Ann Cook and Charlie Moss, Eleanor and Domenico Di Soleil, Sherry and Joe Felson, Susan Gordon and Scott Francis, Anna and Matt Friedman, Jennifer and Brian Hermelin, Barbara and John Lee, Liza and John Mauk, Katie and Amnon Rodan, Lee and Reggie Smith, Ellen Sussman, and Robin and Mark Tebby. We have a few quick corporate sponsors. Christie's Auction House and Pure Insurance support the series. United Airlines supports travel for the ranch. Cultured Magazine is our media partner, and Sarah Harrelson, the founder and editor-in-chief of Cultured Magazine, helped curate our series this summer. So super excited to thank all of them. They've really made an amazing summer possible. Think about things you heard on stage here from Titus Kafar, Kelly Akashi, Kathy Opie, Dawood Bey, Izzy Wood last week, and this week, Miles Greenberg. We're really excited to have you here. Miles is a Canadian-born and New York City-based performance artist and sculptor. He's not a sculptor, he's a sculptor. His work consists of large-scale immersive and site-specific environments revolving around the physical body and space. Sensory experiences, marathon durations. I think we'll learn a lot more about that work today if you've not seen it in person. But really evoking both the body as a sculptural material, but also the body as a poetic form and subject. So we're super excited to have you here. Miranda Lash, chief curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, has stepped in to moderate it for us today. We're really excited. We can clap for her. We're really excited to have her here. Huge list of accomplishments that I won't go through all of them, but recently co-directed Prospect 6, the International Art Triennial in New Orleans, to great acclaim, but also just a string of amazing exhibitions at MCA Denver that have really put the museum on the national spotlight and stage. We are super excited to have you here. We're excited to grow our partnership and relationship with such an amazing museum. I'm going to pass it to you to lead our conversation today. Awesome. Thank you both. And thank all of you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. I just want to begin with some thanks to Anderson Ranch. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Elsie. It's a thrill to be here. I work for MCA Denver, a non-collecting museum that is very much, I think, in harmony with Anderson Ranch's mission of supporting work by artists and bringing new work into being. So I want to begin actually in a spirit of thanks to you, Miles. It's been such a pleasure spending time with your work and really appreciating the deep intentionality you bring to every gesture, every movement. I think this is going to be a really rich discussion about what each component of your work signifies and means. And so I thought what we'd do today is talk about the groundings of your practice, talk about some influences, and then really get into some deep dives about specific artworks that you've created over time. And as Peter mentioned, you consider yourself a sculptor, you consider yourself an installation artist, a performance artist, and really thinking deeply about marrying these terms. And so I wanted to ground us in a space of asking you about the medium of the body, and talking about the body and what does it mean, what's at stake with starting with the body as your point of departure?
Hi. Wait, I'm just gonna move this a bit closer. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. Thank you, first and foremost, to you, Miranda, to Anderson Ranch. This is wonderful. It's my first time to Aspen. I didn't know. Now I get it. Yeah, thank you. The body has been my point of departure. It's been sort of the beginning and of a lot of what I do, all of what I do. Even when I'm not working with the body or kind of indirectly then later translating it or interpreting it, I think in through other forms, it remains really at the heart of the conversation. I think that the body has just been, I mean, first and foremost, it started kind of incidentally, right? It started as a means of something I had access to perpetually, something I felt like I understood and can control. But I think that it's become obviously much more than that over the last 10 years of my practice, which is that, I think when you put the body at stake, whether, in the first or second degree, there's sort of this inevitable authenticity that takes place, and something that is also very empathetic with the audience, where the audience understands, I think, their own bodies through depictions, through projections into, forms outside of themselves that they can see themselves in. And I think that's to me quite clearly the origin of like our Western classical canon and the ways in which the sort of Greco-Roman statuary has persisted as the standard for, for understanding the human form, I guess, through, at least a sort of European lens. There's these sort of enduring forms that I think always come back to the physiology, our own physiology. And so, in writing my own language around that, I've done that very intuitively, but I've noticed a certain, a very visceral response on behalf of the audience, which has a huge precedent through, not only the art history that we maybe recognize, but every art history around the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's something undeniable about the body.
I agree. I want to pull further as we talk about that thread of empathy, because I think it comes up a lot in your work, and what it means to build that empathy through extending the gesture and prolonging it. And I wanted to acknowledge some of your influences in developing that vocabulary. You've talked about Edward Locke, Robert Wilson, Marina Abramovich as mentors, as places of inspiration. I loved learning that you saw the Marina Abramovich's The Artist is Present at a young age.
I was 12, yeah.
12. And, for those of you who are not familiar with that seminal work at MoMA, it essentially comprised of Marina sitting in a chair for extended periods of time and saying nothing, eyes forward, greeting each audience member in turn. And there was a deep grounding in that extension of one action, being present. And I love that it was not only an inspiration for you, but that you then worked with her institute on the development of a piece.
Yeah, sorry, they told me to drink a lot of water here, so I'm just gonna...
It's true, all right.
Yeah, I mean, Marina's been my professor, auntie, art kind of, definitely one of my art moms. Edward Locke as well, he was my first boss back when I was 17. I started working for him as an intern. And then Robert Wilson, actually through Marina, she was the one who recommended that I do the Watermill Center residency. Didn't really give much context as to what it was, but I arrived and Bob was a huge influence on me and how I think and how his decisiveness and his sort of definitive approach and very kind of intuitive approach, who, we recently lost, and I hold very dear in my heart. But yeah, no, I'm seeing Marina's retrospective at MoMA. My mom brought me down from where I grew up, Montreal, with her on a sort of a weekend trip to see this work because she's been a super fan since forever. And, you know, I didn't really know what I was walking into, but kind of seeing and understanding this medium that could take place. I think my mother was an actress when I was a kid, so I grew up, instead of going to daycare, I grew up on a tour bus full of, you know, Russian, Ukrainian clowns, and it was Buffon theater, you know, yeah, I mean, it was super weird, you know, there was pieces where my mother would be up on stage and, you know, a fat suit with severed limbs, just on stage with like a bald cap and a prosthetic ear glued to her forehead and screaming under an upside down cross with a heavy eyeliner, you know.
Whoa, just, you know, standard childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but like theater for me was like this format that I could appreciate it. I think it kind of honed my sensibilities, but at the same time it was a format that I wanted to run away from, because this relationship, this sort of proscenium thing for me was not something that I was attracted to making stuff in. I loved going to the Louvre. I loved going to the Met. I loved going to like the Hermitage, like the Prado, like these types of museums, these formats of where you could navigate, you know, sort of freely roam. You know, it was just more friendly to my particular, you know, neurodiversity or whatever. You know, it just wasn't like sitting in rows. To me, it automatically, as soon as there was somebody on either side of me who I was going to have to scoot past to discreetly leave, and like that made me deeply uncomfortable. And I think it just gave me all this social anxiety that prevented me from making work in that format anyway. I'm a much better audience member when in front of a piece of stone, because I can look at it. I know that it'll always be there for me. There's a sense of permanence. There's a sense of kind of an ongoing existence that, yeah, just really inspired me. So seeing Marina's work, I think, gave me license to do that without having to train for years in these, you know, sort of academic institutions that I was oil and water with. You know, I'm a dropout. I left after grade 11 in Montreal, and I needed to start working. And I was doing these sort of ad hoc performances in nightclubs and in you know, queer underground spaces and raves and things like that in Montreal, and then later kind of traveled a little bit with that scene, the ballroom scene, what have you. And but it was very much kind of coming from this lens of like in a nightclub, people are occupied. People are sort of, you know, it's a very dynamic environment. It's not one where people are sort of seated in front of you in a very preordained classical way. You kind of can, like, what if there was I don't know, Venus de Milo in the middle of Berghain, you know? Like, it was sort of, for me, like the place to start was this place where people could kind of flow in and out with their attention of something at will, depending on what was happening around them. So that kind of freedom, giving that audience that freedom gave me a lot of freedom in turn, I think, to also take as long as I needed to develop a piece internally. Because I think informs a lot more than I think in narrative. And I was never particularly interested or engaged in the idea of making something that began and ended. So to go through this giant retrospective of Marina's, see her sitting there, and then see her sitting there at the end, I think was just like, was a real like revelation for me. So yeah, I got to meet her a few years later when I was 17. Somehow got an invite over to her house for dinner, and she kind of adopted me.
Wow, lucky you. Yeah. But I think part of what you're talking about is having a more expansive relationship to time.
Yeah.
And not feeling like everything has to be linear, everything has to be sequential. There's this idea that it can be interstitial, it can be engage on your own terms.
Yeah.
And I think that takes us, that's a good segue actually to your 2020 piece, Oyster Knife.
Yeah.
I thought that'd be a great place to sort of, the first artwork to kind of spend a deep dive with. Just to remind why do I need to remind everyone what happened in 2020? We're in COVID, deep COVID, and you come up with a piece, I think we'll go to the video now, that comprises essentially in theory, a very simple act of walking on a treadmill, and you extended it over 24 hours. And and you had a lot. I know that even that process brought forward so many revelations to you as far as how far can you extend yourself? What does it mean to be in this mode of extension? And also just acknowledging what was happening in the world around you. I would love for you to share a bit about this piece.
Sure. So, oh, there I am. I was 22. Yeah, it's, that piece was it was something really new for me. Because in the previous slide, which I don't know if it passed kind of quick, but there's another piece that I did called pneumotherapy, which was sort of the follow-up to this other piece that I'd done. Like I was kind of working on these solo works that were a lot more, like two back. Nope. Are we?
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So that's a good place to start. This is at Rena Spallings in New York. This was like as soon as I moved, like fresh off the boat from Paris. Where I'd done some workshops in École Jacques Lecoq. This was sort of like my kind of debut of doing these like sort of solo works. And it was kind of, I was in a moment of, it was being sort of more and more produced. This was like the first time I ever made something that I was like really, 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 really happy with. And I was like kind of on a high. There was a particular direction in my practice. This was like 4,000 plus stems of lilies and hyacinths. I kind of came up with this after, my residency at Palais de Tokyo. That was sort of preceded by this like trip to Haiti that I had done where I was researching voodoo and kind of coming up with this performance practice that was really centered and sort of anchored in the idea of ritual. And creating these sort of scenarios, these spaces that were very kind of sculptural, I guess, in terms of engagement, like the audience would sort of walk around and kind of free roam. But there was something very highly sensorial about it. I was standing on this boulder that was rotating on this plinth that I had built that was all mirrored, so everything kind of disappeared into this very kind of surreal landscape. We built this garden that was, all inspired by I sampled all the flowers and colors from the opening scene of Solaris by Tarkovsky, where it's the main character's sort of last moments on Earth. It's very kind of hyper surreal, very fragrant, and this was 8 hours. And the previous one was also about 8 hours, and it was like it's sort of like these like pieces that were around like therapy and the idea of healing something sort of intuitively. So this piece was all about kind of the lungs and grief, and this one was about about blood and kind of circulation, and there were these sort of cures for these like intangibles. Thinking about also how like the plague doctors during the plague had these masks, these mask-shaped like beaks. Not many people know that they were stuffed with herbs and flowers to kind of like prevent you from smelling the dead corpses, and that like the sort of smell and the vibe, I guess, of of smelling rotting flesh versus flowers was they didn't understand bacteria, right? Like that was the be-all and end-all of disease for them. So kind of following this like intuitive logic around healing parts of myself that I couldn't understand, and therefore also by extension the audience. And that's kind of what it feels like when you're at a voodoo ceremony or when you're at these kind of rituals in parts of Haiti and Africa, which was all this kind of exploration in terms of like specifically like the Black origins globally, right, of ritual and of duration and of like this sort of kind of pushing past the body's limits in order for something to happen that science has not understood yet. So fast forward to basically less than a month after the next piece on the slide, like less than a month after this, COVID hit, and we were all, doing what we did. Next slide, oyster knife. This was like kind of now we get to this. This was like basically like the eve of, the dawn of Black Lives Matter. And my work has always centered Black bodies very deliberately. not necessarily out of some grandiose political gesture, but kind of just to very gently shift the default. If I'm going to be building a whole universe around bodies, around my lens, my gaze on the world, and I'm going to be sharing it, I'm going to build it around a body that I understand first and foremost. So my body and sort of like queer black bodies became the de facto kind of, you know, primary material and center of this universe. And if I kind of always figured if I can, you know, if I can live my whole life and understand the entire gamut of the human experience through Greek statues that don't necessarily look like me, but I can make that translation from also Bernini, from also Caravaggio, from also, you know, all of these references that we understand as neutral, supposedly neutral. If I can make that shift my entire life, it's not too much to ask for an audience to do the same. So, you know, there was something kind of very instant about during that moment of, you know, June-ish 2020, where everybody wanted me to do an Instagram Live. and there was something very private, I think, about that moment for me in particular. And I think for a lot of black people who weren't necessarily, like, I think, like, for me at least, the experience was like, okay, like, yeah, I've always been afraid of dying at the hands of police, but that was a secret. And I was kind of going through, you know, going through my life up until that point, very content with that dichotomy between my internal reality when I would face law enforcement and what would actually happen, right? Or what people knew about. And so suddenly it felt like my diary had gotten leaked all over the internet and everyone was experiencing the same thing and being kind of hyper aware and like, you know, reading these and asking, are you okay, are you okay? You know, all of this noise that was actually really not particularly helpful for me and I think a lot of people. And of course there were calls to action and things that we all participated in, but I needed to find also a poetic gesture that could kind of, I think, encapsulate that moment in a way that felt elegant. And Ahmaud Arbery was shot. He was a young black man who was just running, and I kind of got obsessed with just this idea of cardio, because it's like it's like a bang, not a bang but a whisper, you know, kind of thing. Like it just felt so banal and so unpoetic to get shot while going on your morning jog. You know, it's not worthy of anybody. And so I kind of wanted to see how I could, with very, very, very limited resources, in what I got was an empty theater in Montreal. If we could skip back to Oyster Knife, actually, and I'll just talk about it quite quickly. That gesture, you know, I spoke to Marina about it, and she was like, okay, well, let's rely on the performance art of the 70s. I was like, perfect, let's kind of, you know, I was kind of thinking in that space. I got an empty theater, I got a sort of portable kind of walking pad, you know, from Amazon, and set up this kind of 2-camera setup where they would alternate between cameras every minute. So it would go from a full body to a portrait, and I decided I was going to kind of reiterate this walking, this sort of movement, just this gesture, this like very basic shape, until it became something poetic, until it became something worthy and romantic and in some kind of communion with God, whatever that is, you know. And yeah, so at the same time, right before I actually executed the piece, you know, yeah, there was another young man. His name's escaping me right now. I don't know if anybody knows it off the top of their head, who was murdered here in Colorado, I believe. You know, walking home at night.
In Aurora.
In Aurora, exactly.
Yeah.
A young violinist. I wish I had it off. Yeah. But that one hit me a little harder because he looked a lot like me, and he was the same age as me. And so yeah, so this piece was really like you know, a means of kind of like reclaiming that without, I guess, still within a language that felt true to me, and finding a way, not to, I guess, address the pain and the trauma and the whatever, because I think that's something I've always avoided in my work. Like, I don't want to create some theater of Black Death, I think, within the scope of my work, or highlight, or, some people do that very beautifully, very viscerally. It's not my cup of tea. I would rather, find ways to commune with the spirit, in my own way, I guess.
I think it's, you talked about some incredible pieces that were 8 hours. This one was 24. You've experimented with different durations, and I think we could apply duration to so many of your pieces. But just for the sake of the audience understanding, would you be willing to share sort of a bit of what the visceral experience is like, say, in hour 18 or 20?
So, did you know you could run out of thoughts? No, literally, there's a point where I was like, I am watching reruns of my own thoughts. I've thought about everything that's ever happened to me, everything that could ever happen to me that I wish to entertain, everything that's happening to me right now. I ran out of thoughts, which was really humbling. Oh my God. We don't think that it's so possible. When you're just staring into literally like the abyss, right? Also, not wearing my contact lenses because you can't wear contact lenses for 24 hours, so I'm just kind of seeing like a black blur in front of me. I have no idea what time. People think that I knew what time it was. I had no idea how long I was walking. So you have to make this contract with yourself where you're like, I'm going to do this until I die. Like literally, like it sounds so dramatic.
To ask, like
but
you weren't like, are we on
no,
16 or?
I couldn't talk. No one was there.
Oh my God.
You think I could talk to someone? No, no one was there. Like there was a security guard who would check in every so often, and of course there were people up in the booth, like who were like in the theater, but they went to bed, and yeah, there was like 24 hours. There was some form of security. They could call people, whatever. So come 7 a.m., it was 4 p.m. to 4 p.m. And when I show it, again, wherever I show it as a video installation, it shows from 4 p.m. to 4 p.m., so it's accurate. 7 a.m., I fainted for a total of 20 minutes. And it was a funny story because, somebody, of course, the security guard came in at one point, I'm on the floor. I somehow elegantly managed to lower myself without bashing my head. But it also had a pressure sensor so that the thing stopped, like after 30 seconds of me not moving, and it just kind of, I was on the ground, unconscious, and somebody came in and was like, called somebody, who called somebody, who called somebody, who called my mom, who called somebody, who called, and people were kind of freaking out up the ladder until it got to Marina, and she's up at 7, having her morning coffee in Hudson. It was lovely. And she's just like, and everyone's panicking, and she was just like, if he's out for an hour, do something. And I was like, and thankfully she did, 22 minutes later, I come to, and it was great, because this is exactly what I experienced in Haiti, where I would watch people, during Day of the Dead celebrations, they would lug these mattresses, right? They would put these mattresses sort of on the periphery of where they were going to be doing this ritual. And I was like, oh, are they going to stay the night? Like, what's going on? And one by one, as this ritual is going on, they're dropping like flies, and then like people from the kind of from around, I was there, I was sort of like, do I do something? Wow. People would just grab whoever had gone unconscious, 10, 20, half an hour in, and would just throw them on the mattress, and then they would kind of come to, sort of channel the spirit, whatever, revive, and then keep going. And there's this thing for me about committing to something that is bigger than what your body can do, or what you even know your body can do. I didn't rehearse that. I've never rehearsed any of this.
Right. Well,
of these.
In the same way, you can't rehearse a marathon.
Well, exactly. You can sort of train for it a little bit. Like I work out, I do Pilates. I'm gluten-free. I don't know. Like, but like there's this thing. Yeah, there's this thing about I think going completely into something before you know whether or not it'll work, and your whole brand is behind it, your whole name, your whole, you've committed to it. I've even gotten a tattoo before a show to make sure I would do it. Saint Sebastian, we'll get there. But
Yeah.
you know, yeah, it was great. When I woke up, it was a whole other state, and I'm never going to do it again.
Right. Well, I understand.
Nor do I recommend it, but
Yeah.
it changed my life forever. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
You
yeah.
know, I think it's it's fascinating to think about that concept of the limits of the body, the limits of the mind. And I love that in that same year, you also did the Embrace.
Yeah.
And if we could go to the Embrace, it's right by Oyster Knife. It's an incredibly tender piece. And I think this is actually a great way to start talking about sculpture in your work and how it plays out. I know it's yourself and another individual wearing contacts, white contacts, so you can't actually see anything.
It's actually, I performed it 3 times, I think.
Okay.
But the principle of the piece is during COVID, the thing that was so jarring, I think, for a lot of people was losing touch, physical touch with people, right? Even just things like, I mean, I live in New York City. I'm from Montreal, where we all kiss on both cheeks. You know, there's these subtle little moments in living in density where you do end up brushing up against somebody, and it becomes natural to you won't leave the house without somehow coming in contact with someone's skin a few times, right? And there was something about losing that I think put us all into a bit of a tailspin, at least for me. And I wanted to somehow preserve, you know, whether it's a subway platform or a one-night stand, like the kind of, you know, like the touch of a stranger is something so indescribable and interesting to me. And I was like, how can we put this under a bell jar? How can we stick this in formaldehyde, keep it forever, if we never get it again? So this piece was sort of like after Rodin kind of Embrace, you know, I was trying to find a way to like preserve what it is. There have to be 2 separate preparation spaces. Both performers are wearing white blinding contacts, which is something I use in most of my work. They meet for the first time inside of this glass cube only by touch, because they can't see each other and they're not meant to speak. So they both enter from opposite sides on a ladder and basically hold each other for opening hours. So in the case of this was Farsco in New York. They were open like 7 hours a day, so it was a 7-hour performance every day. And they actually own this performance. So like the performance is actually a set of instructions. This was a collection show that they did, and it was myself, Yoko Ono on one side and Louise Bourgeois on the other side. No pressure. But it was great, and they ran it for 6 months, and they had the performance running every like twice a week, I guess, for 6 months. Mm-hmm. So that was how many different pairings. No one can perform it twice together, in theory. You know, like so it's really meant to be new pairings every single time. So you're really witnessing like a first touch every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's something about that frisson of that first contact.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And like it was interesting because I showed it for the first time in Denmark, right? And people were like, they responded really weird to it because they have this particular history with slavery where they kind of wiped their hands of it, but they designed all the ships, right? So there was something a little bit like tense where they were just like, this is horrible, this is slavery, this is something or other. And it goes to show like when you put like black bodies in a kind of you know, you consider or treat the black body as neutral, that people will project certain histories onto them. And of course, there is history embedded, you know, mm-hmm. I think and trauma embedded into the body. I'm very interested with how that makes us move, with how that gives us certain particularities in our DNA that we recognize, you know, but ultimately this is a piece about romance and about touch and about something that is entirely universal. So that's just an example of that. I think to kind of contextualize that conversation.
No, thank you for that. I think that desire to like get to universal language within sculpture relates to this piece, and I think also relates to works like Sébastien, like where there's something very classical in the aesthetic of the work. It feels like an adaptation of a sculpture from antiquity, or something that has roots potentially in Christian iconography, you know, the idea of the canon of sculpture as you see it in a place like the Louvre.
Right.
And you mentioned the Louvre being a huge inspiration. And actually, if we could go to that slide of Sébastien in the Louvre, because there's this, and I'm sorry, I hate skipping over things. But
No,
I
it's
also,
okay.
Yeah, but
We can talk about that one
Yeah,
at some point. It was fun.
et tout pour Sébastien. And you know, just as the art historian, of course, I'm going to remind folks, Saint Sebastian, there's so many famous paintings of him throughout Western art history of the saint who is pierced by arrows, who is martyred by being pierced by arrows. So there's this referent, for sure, but also this deeply contemporary and personal feeling to this work. And so can you talk about the process of, well, I'm dying to know how you proposed for the Louvre or how that dynamic worked, and then the
How I proposed?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
They proposed to me, which is
okay.
really cool.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, it was Denis Saint-Grau, who's an amazing art historian, writer, thinker, curator. He does, you know, he's in charge of contemporary with the Louvre. He was recently appointed, you know, at the time, and he had invited me and you know, a couple dozen, 20 or so young artists to basically do, you know, create works in the Louvre while it was closed. So I obviously proposed to do a durational performance. We couldn't have a live public there at the time. Like, they were still kind of experimenting with what that looked like. I knew exactly where I wanted to do it. And I was inspired actually partially by, this is like a weird piece of lore about this piece that nobody knows about, but we had to work in the Louvre while it was
Fabulous.
closed, but what you can't necessarily see from this angle is behind the camera here. This is the Cour Marly, if anybody has ever walked through this courtyard in Paris, or like the, you know, when you're walking towards the pyramid, there are windows that look into this room from the outside. So I was inspired by Joseph Beuys in this piece that he did, which is explaining pictures to a dead hare, where he had this face covered in gold leaf, and he had a dead hare where he locked the doors of the museum and or gallery or wherever, and was explaining these paintings to a dead taxidermied rabbit. And but people could see from the outside. He just locked it, and the windows were still, you know, so the performance was this sort of voyeuristic thing. So I picked the room in the Louvre that you can see from the outside. So when I was shooting, you know, we were shooting this piece that was a 5-hour durational performance, which was a study for the kind of later, like, more official Sebastian piece. This was, we did have an audience, even if we didn't have an audience. Those arrows were through my skin. That was real. Those are not prosthetics.
I know a particular badge of honor is that you officially changed rules at the Louvre through this piece.
Yeah, so I wrote to, if anybody's familiar with Franco B, Ron Athey, they're like kind of two of the godfathers of like this sort of like body art performance, which was never really my thing. I've never bled on stage, you know, it's not really my, has never really been my approach, but I had this idea. I was like, I really want to use, you know, somehow pierce my skin with these real arrows. Like, it felt natural. And so I called them up, and they kind of gave me a few references, and I found some people who work like kind of more in like the BDSM kind of community and whatnot, who, you know, have experience with very surgically kind of inserting and extracting sharp objects from people's skin. So I had a professional piercer. I had, you know, it was all surgical steel. Like, I crafted these arrows with surgical steel at a jewelry designer in New York. And yeah, it hurts for a second, but it's like a big earring. And yeah, there were 5 of them. So, oh yeah, okay, so this is actually like a video excerpt. Like, later, Klaus, who couldn't be with us today, but he curated this show. Can we get volume? Is that possible? Thank you. Yeah, so this piece was, this is like the sort of like, if that last one was the study for Sebastian, this is the official. It was in the last Venice Biennale at Palazzo Malipiero. The camera that you're seeing is actually a camera that was fully visible on stage. If you saw in the previous image, there are 4 cameras that were on these robotic arms that were automated and kind of scanning. They could see each other, right? And scanning up and down my body for 8.5 hours of this performance. So I sort of, kind of recreated it. I had this drip of corn syrup coming from or cane sugar syrup coming from the ceiling, and gradually just sort of, I was on this rotating boulder, again on a motor.
How do you decide when the gesture is complete? Like, in other words, what should the duration be? How do you know how do you know when it feels complete?
Opening hours, mostly. No, really, like for me, I'm like, because if I am really going for this sculpture thing, right, which like now I'm happy to say I've been making sculptures proper for 4 years, but like for me, a sculpture is something that you can see at any point. There's no, you should be able to see it anytime the museum is open. So I start before the museum opens, and I end before, like right after it closes. Ideally, I don't like the applause thing. Like that feels because it's not me. Yeah. So this was 8.5 hours. This is like the best day of my life. I had such a good time.
So I think that, again, that conversation with sculpture, I know is something that you're probing it through different angles. And
Right.
I feel like this particular piece kind of shows these deep roots within like the dialogue of sculpture. And it's funny, in talking with you about your work, I was thinking about how so often the roots of sculpture that we think about in terms of antiquity came into being at the same moment that theater as an art form and performance as an art form was also being codified, solidified, and disseminated. So I love that link between the idea of the performed work and sculpture coming up at the same moment. I do want to transition also now to Le Miroir.
Cool. Yeah.
The mirror. I know we're jumping around a bit, but just kind of an expansion on that idea of sculpture.
Sure. Yeah. This piece was like, actually, I don't know. We definitely have it's like the last 2 slides that we have stills of it before we jump to the video. Is this the most up-to-date slideshow? Because it feels like there's something kind of missing. Wait, can we go forward again? Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. Sure. This was the live performance in Marrakesh that we did for 154 Art Fair with Touria. This was actually the most like cinematic I've ever gone, because like the video work has always been a component, but it's become less and less about documentation, more and more about kind of creating works unto themselves, as well as like the sculptural work, which I'm sure we have images of later. But it's this was a live performance, 6-hour live performance I did in a temple in Marrakesh, and if you go back to other way, and again. It became a 6-channel video installation that I mounted in Dubai as like an exhibition.
So I love how this is an expansion of the sculptural practice, and also I do want to talk about how your sculpture is evolving as we go, but I also want to talk about just acknowledging the potential to read politics into the work, and you shared a particular story with Le Miroir, where there was concern potentially of censorship, and so acknowledging, I do believe your practice is grounded in a much more universal place, and yet there is this tendency at times to read it in certain ways because it's the Black body, it's the queer body. Do you want to talk about like navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, these are inherent things to me that I don't think about. I think about them as much as being left-handed, well, more, but like I would like to think that I mean that's not accurate, but the tendency to kind of fixate on that as like a theme in the work is not necessarily, I think, something that I think is particularly fair, other than centering. I guess in my day-to-day life, I think of myself as somebody who is politically engaged and as a civilian, right? but when I make my work, I'm not kind of, it was, God, I forget who said this, but it was this amazing Senegalese filmmaker. It wasn't Djibril Diop Mambéty, it was somebody else. Senghor, maybe, who had said, like, I'm not, he was like, are you worried about not being understood in Europe, or your film's not being understood in Europe? He said, you know, let's be clear about one thing. I'm not a sunflower turning around the European sun. I am a sun in and of myself. So I think decentralizing this idea of like being in relation to anything else is something that's really important for me to feel free as somebody who makes work. You know, and like I take liberties with my identity and push it in different directions and ways, like, you know, kind of extending blackness into like, you know, kind of this like dark paint and things like that, or like different shades. In the same way that like, for me, that's directly inspired by Kerry James Marshall, and how he kind of, you know, uses, like extends blackness into this like blue black, into this shadow, into this shade, into a form that, you know, that abstracts the idea of it and what it brings, I think, politically into a visual language as well. And, you know, I do that as well with symbols and shapes and mirrors and things. You know, I'm trying to create a landscape that's somewhat kind of surreal, but still addresses things that are I guess physiologically authentic to me, ancestrally authentic. You know, yeah. So Le Miroir was this big kind of stream of consciousness kind of film, where I didn't really know where it was going. It kind of became this like queer Orpheus story. We can maybe roll the clip, like just like 45 seconds of it.
And there's,
Yeah.
yes.
But yeah.
So, and I think we should. And then only, because I know our time is winding down and I want to make sure folks have times to ask questions.
Totally, yeah.
There's one artwork I can't resist kind of closing on because it's fascinating to me. So let's watch Miroir.
I started it at a...
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Can you just like kind of scrub in the middle, and I'll just keep going, 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 keep going. Keep going. Yeah, a little bit more. Back. There. Thank you. 10:15. Great number. Thanks.
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge, like, it's just visually stunning. Like,
Thank
it's a
you.
visually stunning work. You know, I do want to...
I do want to be Isaac Julian when I grow up.
Yeah.
Can we turn up the volume? Would you believe we made it past the censors in Dubai?
Did. And it's going to be shown again in Dubai.
Yeah, and elsewhere, hopefully. This was honestly the video work that I'm probably one of the video works that I'm the proudest of. Real python, by the way. That's probably, that kind of gives you the long and the short of it.
So,
Of course I would put myself in a gay sex scene in the desert with a python.
yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, wouldn't you? I'm in all of the shows, by the way, in case that's kind of part of my like ethical code in my studio, that I'm like, I would never put anybody through anything that I'm not also going to do.
Fair.
If it's a solo work, it's going to be me. If it's going to be reperformed a few times, maybe it could be somebody else. But definitely, I would never have anybody reperform anything that is like, like Oyster Knife. That's never going to happen again. Yeah.
There's a groundedness in that. So unfortunately, I think we're going to open it. Well, not unfortunately, fortunately, we are going to open it now to questions. Before I do, I just want to first acknowledge you have so many sources in your work. We didn't get to talk about video games, which I think is
Totally.
another fascinating reference.
Oh my God. We also didn't really, wait, can we like rapid fire like the next slides, like just like super fast? Okay, not that, that's the beginning. Keep going. Something I'd be remiss not to mention. Oh, that was a fun piece. Oh, there we go, back. Sculptures, I make sculptures. With a 3D scanner of, anyway, go down all the way, keep going. That was a fun video show. Stedelijk Museum, I flooded the whole place. Keep going. More stuff. Yokohama Triennale, keep going. Just something that oh yeah, well, we're gonna be here, but the order's all weird. Oh, yeah, I've been making sculptures, and I learned how to make marble sculptures, and this feels important to mention. Anyway, the next slide.
And it is, and also where some of your future projects are going. I think
exactly.
I'll just keep it general and
Yeah.
say that there's exciting things coming down the pike.
October, Paris, please come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know that others have questions, so I want to just pause here. Really, thank you, Miles.
No, of course.
So
Yeah,
rich.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Incredible.
Thank you.
And we are going to open the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh, we've got some microphones coming around.
Thank you. Thank you both. Miles, I wanted to ask you, you do performance for audiences, and you do performance where there's a lot of video shot and a lot of documentation. And I'm curious about your relationship with audience and how that's evolved over time, or when that changes and shifts for you.
Great question. I don't really have the strongest relationship with, in terms of like, there's a lot of artists who love to interact. I usually kind of keep it pretty contained. I think I'm more, I prefer to occupy the space of sculpture, or to make it. None of the work is interactive properly. I definitely feel the energy of the audience, but I have been using these blinding white contact lenses for all 10 years that I've been working. Because it kind of started as a blindfold, actually, but because I wanted to kind of avoid this like mutual gaze, which also I think like culpabilizes the audience a lot of the time, especially where I was living at the time in Paris. Like French people don't like to confront their colonial past or realities at all. There's this real reticence or discomfort with like being seen looking at you know, a body that may create a dynamic of subjugation. If you think about it, unlike here, their colonial gestures were far. You know, anything that had to do with slavery or transatlantic, any kind of trade, whatever, the trafficking of bodies, that was all offshore. So for them, there's something very, very inherent, mostly in most of Europe, really, kind of inherently disquieting, where they would kind of shut down if they could see me looking at them from the work. So I've kind of created this barrier that both protects myself and the audience at the same time, where it allows the performers to, they mostly only see each other. Like we only kind of see each other through like sort of lighting techniques, and hence kind of secretly the mirrors are oftentimes that I'm like standing on. They're highly reflective, so the light will penetrate the contact lenses, and I can see direct lighting. Like here, I would be able to see the screen. That none of you, maybe you, you know. So like it's kind of a technique to like filter dimensions, you know. And so then also the audience can like they will look this close without feeling like I can actually perceive them, which I can't. So it just, yeah, it kind of, church and state, I don't know. Yeah.
Yep.
Hit me.
Thanks for sharing, Miles. I'm over here. Hello.
Hi.
Your commitment to your work is really what stands out to me in your lecture. It's really impressive. I missed the beginning bit, so I don't know if I missed it, but I've been hearing so much about Dubai, Paris, Europe, Morocco. Have you spent a lot of time on the continent of Africa? And if not, is that something you'd be interested in terms of doing a residency like on the continent or something like that?
Absolutely. I haven't spent a lot of time there. I've spent some time in South Africa. I've spent Morocco, of course. I've spent some time in Marrakesh, and I've been to Egypt. But apart from that, huge blind spot. And I'm really excited to be working with this incredible curator who's like my sister. Her name is Olivia Anani. She is based in Paris and Cotonou, and she's Beninese and is working on a lot of projects in Benin. And so I've been, and I have contact with artists and residencies in Ghana. Like it's very much coming. I just haven't made it there yet, like fully. Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about Ghana if that's of interest.
Okay.
All right.
Call me.
I saw Christian here. Yeah.
I'm interested in the idea of duration and the transformative personal thing that's going on with you during that time, besides the fainting that you mentioned. Like as you're holding position
Yeah.
and you're like blind to the audience, the component of like personal transformation that's happening in you, is that a part of your work? And then is it important for you to communicate that at all? Or does something shift in you during that duration?
Yeah. Is it important for me to communicate it? I think that there's an inevitable reading of what's happening in my body, like, and the bodies of the performers, like visually, that I guess if it doesn't translate, maybe I'm not doing my job. But like it's got, ideally it should resonate in a way that I don't necessarily like, I feel like often put words to it publicly. But like I will say that there's definitely levels of discomfort as well as euphoria, as well as like this sort of like ecstaticness. And I think that's why I was really drawn to Saint Sebastian, is this like, historical kind of, the ecstasy of, right? Like it's this kind of being, kind of going into communion with the divine through this kind of like pain that turns into pleasure. It's also, I think, a lot of why he's interpreted in this very queer kind of lens. But it becomes quite, there's like a fluidity, I think, to what certain sensations like mean anymore after a certain amount of time, that open you up to a lot of meaning hidden in the body, in your physiology, that I try to kind of translate as well in the video work and in the sculpture too. And also through the like kind of stories that we end up associating the pieces with, right? Yeah.
Oh, got one. Got one right here.
Hello, I really appreciate the way you articulate your creative process, your personal experience, but I had a visceral response to your piercings, and I wondered something more prosaic. Do you have any permanent scars emotionally or physically from that performance?
Emotionally, no, but you want to see? Yeah, I have. There's little scars. They healed very well. A part of that as well. A part of that show that was kind of my personal favorite touch. I'm really glad she agreed to it. Was I learned about art by going to the Venice Biennale with my mother every 2 years. She brought me every 2 years, my whole life, including in utero, and she agreed to actually be the one who comes up on stage and pulls them out of me at the end of the show. So she
Yeah. Thanks for adding that.
Yeah,
My
no,
goodness.
totally. Yeah, that's a little piece of lore as well.
Yeah.
So she came and she removed them, and the bleeding stopped pretty quickly. No, to be honest, that was. I went through a lot in that show, but I can't say that there was anything. And this is why I think it's so crucial to talk about like the fluidity of the experience of being part of all of this. Is that it's so not about pain. It's so far from being about pain. I mean, pain is like for when the conversation stops at the idea of pain, for me, it's like we haven't even scratched the surface. Because
You've talked about joy.
I've talked a lot about joy,
Yeah.
and I continue to, and I feel a lot of joy. And I think that's that's kind of for me like the most crucial like takeaway. And I appreciate the kind of visceral reaction and also the empathy, but they weren't that big.
Got one right here.
Hi, I love how much you've synthesized. It's so high impact. And
Thank you.
looking at it, I couldn't help but think of Angels in America. And I just wonder if that's what you think of that. It's
I have to say, I'm not deeply. I haven't read it. I haven't seen the play. I haven't. There's a film as well, right? Yeah, haven't seen it. Not familiar. Can't.
well, visually,
I will now.
your expression reminded me so much of. I mean, that is an old film too. I mean,
Yeah.
old by maybe it's only 20 years old, but it's just so fresh, and your way of expression is really high impact. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
I love your work. Talking about, you did not get a chance to talk about your sculptures, and I would just love to hear a little bit about those.
Yeah.
So thanks. When it came to I love constraints, and I love the constraints of the body, and of also the fact of when you're making a performance, you don't. You can't revise anything afterwards, so I kind of I needed to make some limits, because I knew that if ever I'd been faced with making something alone in my studio and having to put it out voluntarily, until the audience is literally consuming it, I will change it to the last minute, including the titles, whatever. So I needed to come up with a set of rules and regulations around the work that felt like I could just follow that, and I didn't have much of a choice. So what I did was I modified a 3D scanner with the help of some technicians to take away its ability to interpret movement. So it sees movement as static, as stillness, basically. And it's a 3D scanner. It's a handheld 3D scanner that you kind of, it looks like a travel steamer. Basically, it's made for large objects that are too big to fit into the sort of traditional 3D scanners that we see that are like a cylinder. And so you kind of run across the body with it, and I'll, try to capture the last moments of every performance with it. So maybe each sculpture might be 1 to 3 minutes of scanning, and so I'll go up and down and see that one in particular. You saw a sort of a fan shape. That's a hand doing this along the back of the person it was with. That one was actually, I was in that one. Yeah, through that technology, the machine basically doesn't throw away any excess data either. So you end up with this massive, massive file, and there's about 40 hours of importing the data and then crunching it, where I can only basically see it. I can't revise anything. I can only see what has happened 2 days later. So based on that, I make some kind of adjustments, but the first and primary material, even if we're talking about marble here, is the body. I sculpt physically first, and then I kind of make sort of digital adjustments later. And now I've started working more and more, sort of working the form more and more in post. And the show, which will be life-size cast aluminum sculptures in Paris in October, is going to be these forms that I've been a lot more deliberate about, where I'm recreating certain figures from mythology. But this, all of the sort of titles here, where you have Orpheus holding Eurydice, Patroclus holding Achilles, these kind of different myths and whatnot, they came after the form, whereas now I'm kind of going for
Seeking the form.
Seeking the form, and
Yeah.
more intentionally, yeah. So yeah, this is me kind of also creating a practice that I know I'll be able to do. I'm 27 now, and doing stuff like this, you age like a ballerina, right? Like, I'm not going to be doing this into my 40s. Like, you know, so this is kind of my more sustainable practice. This is what you'll be seeing me doing at 75. So I just needed to learn how to do it first. So yeah, but spent a year and a half learning how to carve marble. That was fun and hard and expensive.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi.
And then I'll be here all day, so just like come up to me and hang out.
Yeah, this may be a question that I might need to ask you more personally, but if you feel like you don't want to answer it, that's
Absolutely.
totally fine. I'm a neurodivergent person that just learned that I'm neurodivergent, and so when you brought that up briefly, it got me wondering, like, is that a theme in your work? Do you think about neurodivergence and perception as a performance artist, or just as a person?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, and thank you for talking about that. I do. I mean, like, look, I'm on the autism spectrum and have been diagnosed with OCD and ADHD. But primarily, like, the OCD is something that I think about a lot because it's something that I had to, you know, work on pretty significantly in order to even do what I do. And I feel like what I do has turned into my sanctuary from that. If I'm, you know, living too long without making stuff, I have a hard time leaving the house sometimes. Whereas, like, the fear, the compulsions, the obsessions, and the things that actually do kind of keep me, you know, it's like a very physiological thing, right? It's a physical ailment. It's something that where, you know, there'll be days where something's not right in the house or on my body or something or other that where it has to sort of be just so, and if I can't achieve that, I can't move on or accomplish things. On stage is the place where I have the least fear, the least doubt, the least symptoms. It's the only place where I feel like fully 100% free from it. So I feel really, really lucky that I've been able to create a livelihood around something that frees me. You know, we're not all so lucky, but I think that, yeah, if for me, if you can kind of find a way of sublimating whatever it is that is inborn to you, rather than fighting it, making it something that's poetry, and that's hopefully beautiful, at least to you. It's pretty great.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you, Miranda. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me ramble.
Not at all. Thank you, Miles.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
That's great.